Factories. They're more than just buildings. They're monuments to human ambition, places where dreams were turned into reality. But what happens when they fall silent? When the workers leave and the machines stop, these places often take on lives of their own. Tonight, we bring you 4 terrifying tales of abandoned factories where the past lingers and the present becomes a waking nightmare. These are 4 true horror stories of old abandoned factories. Frank had been out of work for months. Bills were piling up and desperation had set in. So when he saw a job ad offering double pay for a night shift at an old car factory, he didn't hesitate. The factory had been partially reopened, or so the ad claimed. But when Frank arrived, the reality was far from what he expected. The parking lot was overgrown with weeds, and the factory itself loomed like a forgotten monolith, its windows blackened and cracked. A single flickering bulb above the entrance was the only source of light. Frank hesitated, but the thought of a steady paycheck pushed him inside. The ad called it an active site, but the inside was anything but. Dust coated every surface, and machinery stood frozen, rusted in place. Still, Frank clocked in. The silence was unnerving, but he told himself it was just an easy paycheck. As the night wore on, Frank began his patrol. At first, it was quiet, almost peaceful, but then he heard it, a faint clang echoing from deep within the factory. "It's just the wind," he muttered, gripping his flashlight. But the sounds grew more frequent. Tools shifted positions, a wrench clattered to the floor, though no one was there to touch it. And then there was the clock. No matter where Frank went, the clock on the wall always read 3:33 a.m. He checked his watch. 4:10 a.m. Something was wrong. That's when he heard it. The sound of machinery roaring to life. A conveyor belt that had been dormant for decades suddenly shuddered and began moving. Frank approached, his heart pounding. Pieces of metal moved along the belt, clinking and clattering, assembling into something grotesque. It was a figure, a humanoid shape but twisted and wrong, with glowing red eyes. The figure turned its head to Frank and spoke in a voice that rattled his bones. "Your shift has just begun." Frank bolted for the exit, but the doors wouldn't budge. They were welded shut. He screamed, pounding on the steel as the factory filled with the sound of grinding machinery. When the morning crew arrived, Frank was gone. His time card was still in the clock and his flashlight lay on the floor. Workers say the machines still start up at 3:33 a.m., as if the factory is waiting for its next victim. For years, the residents of a small town heard a siren coming from the old steel mill. It was strange, eerily timed, always on the same night every month. The factory had been shut down after a massive explosion claimed the lives of several workers. No one knew why the siren still blared, and no one dared to find out, except Lisa. Lisa was a skeptic, a thrill seeker. To her, the stories were just urban legends. She wanted to prove there was a logical explanation for the siren, but some mysteries are better left unsolved. Lisa parked her car outside the steel mill and stepped into the darkness. The air was thick and cold. Her flashlight illuminated massive steel beams and machinery covered in decades of rust. The first sound came suddenly, a faint wail, almost melodic. Lisa paused, gripping her flashlight tighter. The sound grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't just a siren anymore, it was screaming. She followed the noise deeper into the factory, the shadows around her seeming to move. The siren morphed into a voice, whispering, then calling her name. "Lisa! Lisa!" The sound led her to an old control room. A single red light flashed on a panel, casting an eerie glow. Lisa stepped closer, her breath hitching. Suddenly the siren stopped. Silence filled the room, and then she saw them. Burned and twisted workers, their faces frozen in agony, stared at her from the shadows. One stepped forward, its voice a hollow whisper. "You heard the siren, now you belong to it." Lisa turned to run, but the factory doors slammed shut. The red light on the control panel pulsed faster and brighter, and the screaming returned, deafening. The next morning, Lisa's car was found, the keys still in the ignition, but Lisa was gone. The siren hasn't sounded since, almost as if it got what it wanted. The old toy factory was once the pride of the town, famous for its handcrafted dolls and wooden toys. But after a gruesome accident involving a worker and one of the moulding machines, the factory shut down for good. Over the years, locals whispered about strange noises coming from the abandoned building, clattering machinery, faint laughter, and sometimes voices. For two teens, Jake and Emily, these rumours were too good to resist. Armed with flashlights and a sense of adventure, they decided to explore the factory one night. The place was massive. Rows of empty workbenches, conveyor belts covered in dust, and shelves stacked with forgotten toys. It felt frozen in time, like the workers had just stepped out for lunch and never returned. Jake picked up a teddy bear, its button eyes missing, while Emily joked about how creepy the place felt. That's when Jake found the conveyor belt controls. With a grin, he flipped the switch. At first it was just broken doll parts moving down the line. Arms, legs, heads. But then the belt began to speed up, the clattering echoing through the empty factory. Emily tried to turn it off, but the controls wouldn't respond. As the conveyor belt roared, the broken toys began to assemble themselves, grotesque, misshapen figures with cracked faces and jagged edges. And then they heard it, a childlike voice, faint but chilling. "Why did you hurt me?" The voice came from one of the dolls, its head jerking to face them. More voices joined in, growing louder and more desperate. The room filled with the sound of tiny footsteps as the toys began crawling off the conveyor belt. Emily screamed as a doll grabbed her ankle, its painted smile twisting into something sinister. Jake swung his flashlight wildly, but the toys kept coming, their hollow eyes glowing red. The teens ran, leaving their camera behind. It was found the next morning, still recording. The footage showed the conveyor belt continuing to move on its own, the dolls assembling themselves into an army of the damned. To this day, no one knows what powers the conveyor belt. Locals say if you listen closely at night, you can still hear the laughter of the toys and the whispers of their creator. The old paper factory had been abandoned for decades, left to decay after a mysterious fire gutted the West Wing. Rumours swirled about its former owner, Mr. Grayson, a ruthless businessman who pushed his workers to the brink. When a group of ghost hunters decided to investigate, they hoped to capture evidence of the paranormal. What they found was far worse. The factory was a maze of empty offices, rusted machines and peeling walls. But the most unsettling discovery came when they found a stack of blueprints on a desk. These weren't ordinary schematics. They detailed a hidden room beneath the factory floor, a room that didn't appear in any official plans. The blueprints led the team to a hatch in the middle of the main floor. It was heavy, rusted shut, but with enough effort they pried it open. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. The air grew colder with every step. The walls were lined with strange symbols drawn in a dark, sticky substance. At the bottom they found the room, a cavernous space filled with ancient machinery that hummed softly, as if alive. At the center of the room was a massive mechanical contraption. It looked like a printing press, but its design was grotesque, almost organic. One of the hunters, Alex, accidentally flipped a switch and the machine roared to life. A blinding light filled the room. When it faded, Alex and another team member were gone, vanished without a trace. The remaining hunters searched frantically, but all they found was Alex's camera, which had captured the machine glowing and pulsing like a living thing. As they tried to leave, the hatch slammed shut above them. The symbols on the walls began to glow, and the humming grew louder, almost deafening. Only one hunter made it out, claiming the factory itself was alive, feeding off those who entered. The building has since been sealed, but some say you can still hear the hum of the machine if you stand too close. Factories, monuments to industry, now shadows of their former selves. But as we've seen tonight, some of these places never truly shut down. From machines that defy explanation to spirits trapped in endless labor, the stories remind us of one thing: not every place is meant to be explored. Which of these tales chilled you the most? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more haunting stories like these. Until next time, stay safe.